Picture this. You're standing in this really highly curated, high-end gallery space.
Right.
Or, maybe you're just scrolling through your feed late at night, letting the algorithm just do its thing.
Okay.
And you see it. It's this perfectly geometric, crystal clear, glass-like pyramid. And suspended right in the dead center of this, what looks like an impossible object, is a delicate, fully bloomed flower. I mean, every single petal, every microscopic stamen is perfectly preserved and just seemingly floating in this frozen void.
It's striking, yeah.
Or maybe you're looking at a massive, vibrant kitchen countertop that looks exactly like a cross-section of the ocean. You've got foaming white waves crashing against a shoreline made of real, raw, live-edge wood.
Those are incredible to see in person.
They really are. And as you're looking at these things, the only thought crossing your mind is, how is this even possible? Like, how do you freeze a fragile organic flower in what looks like solid water?
Well, it is a profound visual trick. You are looking at something that appears to be liquid, right? It captures the kinetic energy of fluid, yet it is entirely solid.
Yeah, it's solid.
Exactly. It feels like glass when you run your hand across it, but it doesn't shatter like glass. It basically captures a specific fleeting moment in time with absolute pristine permanence.
Right. And so today, we're going on a journey to really unpack this mesmerizing world. We are diving deep into the realm of resin artistry.
Oh, it's a fascinating space.
It really is. Looking at the stack of sources we've gathered for today, and we're pulling from advanced polymer chemistry journals, we've got private studio manifests of top-tier artists, and some really fascinating market analyses on luxury bespoke goods.
Yeah, the business side is wild.
Totally. So our mission in this deep dive is to figure out exactly how this space operates, because it's this wild collision where hardcore, unforgiving modern chemistry basically crashes right into timeless, deeply emotional creative expression.
That's a great way to put it.
We're looking at a medium that acts simultaneously as a canvas and like a nearly indestructible preservative.
When you look at those sources, it becomes vital to understand that this is not just traditional art.
Right. They're not painting.
Exactly. When a painter uses a canvas, they are working in two dimensions. They're applying thin layers of pigment to a flat surface, relying on shading to suggest depth.
They're just optical tricks, basically.
Right. But resin, and specifically epoxy resin, which is really the dominant focus of our material today, is fundamentally a medium of suspension. It has actual physical depth.
Yeah.
It allows an artist to build three-dimensional worlds. But, that magic you mentioned, the optical illusion of objects floating in frozen water, it isn't magic at all.
No, it's science.
Exactly. It is driven by a very precise, very volatile process of polymerization.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because, to understand the art, we absolutely have to start with the strict, unyielding scientific rules that this medium demands.
You really do.
You mentioned polymerization. We are not talking about squeezing oil paint out of a tube here. We are talking about initiating a live chemical reaction.
Yeah, resin is not a passive material at all. You're essentially playing chemist every single time you work with it.
Which is kind of terrifying.
It can be. So you start with two separate, relatively stable liquid components. You have the A side, which is the resin itself, right? That's a synthetic polymer.
Or the A side.
And then you have the B side, which is the hardener, typically a polyamine. Now, on their own, they just sit in their jugs as highly viscous fluids. Pretty harmless.
It makes up syrup.
Yeah, exactly, like thick syrup. But the moment you mix them together, and this is key, it requires absolute mathematical precision.
Oh, I saw that, like strict ratios.
Very strict. Typically a strict 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 ratio by volume. When you do that, you trigger a massive cascading chemical reaction. The molecules in the resin and the hardener begin to cross-link, forming dense, three-dimensional polymer chains. And as those covalent bonds lock together, they transform those two liquids into a highly durable, rigid solid.
And from reading the chemistry breakdowns in our sources, it's not just a quiet little molecular handshake happening in the cup.
No, it's very violent at the molecular level.
Right. It's an incredibly aggressive reaction. It generates a massive amount of heat. I think the term used in the journals was an exothermic reaction.
Yes, exothermic.
But wait, so the heat isn't just a byproduct of a mistake, right? It's the actual engine of the cure.
That is a crucial distinction. The heat is absolutely the engine. The process of those chemical bonds forming actively releases energy.
Okay.
And that energy accelerates the formation of more bonds, which then releases more heat. It's a feedback loop.
Oh, man.
And this is where the artist first encounters the extreme physical danger of the medium.
Because it can get out of control.
Easily. Because if you mix too much resin at once, or if you, say, pour it too thick in a single layer, that thermal feedback loop compounds geometrically. The heat just cannot escape the mass fast enough.
It's trapped.
Right. It builds and builds within the liquid until you experience what the industry calls a flash cure.
A flash cure. I was reading some historical anecdotes in the sources of massive studio resin fires, and I gotta say, it sounds absolutely terrifying. Especially if you've just spent, weeks prepping a complex mold.
It is the ultimate nightmare scenario for any artist. During a flash cure, the chemical reaction completely escapes the artist's control. The thermodynamics just run wild.
How hot does it actually get?
Oh, the resin can easily reach temperatures exceeding 400 degrees Fahrenheit.
What? 400 degrees?
Easily. It will literally smoke. It will melt right through thick plastic mixing buckets. And yes, it can easily auto-ignite and catch fire in your studio.
That is insane over a piece of art.
Yeah, but, even if it doesn't burn the studio down, a flash cure instantly destroys the artwork.
Because of the heat.
Exactly. The immense uneven heat will cause the polymer block to fracture and crack right down the middle as it cures way too rapidly, or it will severely scorch the resin.
Oh, so it ruins the look.
Completely. It turns that dark, ugly brown, completely destroying that perfect optical clarity you were going for.
So an artist is essentially trying to tame and, ride a miniature chemical fire every single time they pour a piece.
That's a very accurate way to put it, yeah.
And speaking of that scorching or, that yellowing effect, I really want to pivot to something that fascinated me in the market analysis part of our source.
Oh, the longevity aspect.
Yes. This brings up a massive point about longevity. Because we aren't just talking about industrial floor coating here. We are talking about luxury, bespoke art that commands 5 figures.
Right. People pay a lot of money for this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And true luxury, as it turns out, actually has to be engineered at the molecular level.
It does. All epoxy resins are absolutely not created equal. The chemical formulations are highly guarded proprietary secrets among the top manufacturers.
Like Coca-Cola recipe.
Exactly like that. If an artist just buys a cheap industrial-grade boat resin, it might look perfectly clear when they pour it.
Sure, on day one.
On day one, yeah. But over time, exposure to ambient ultraviolet light from the sun will violently attack those polymer chains.
Just from sitting in a room.
Just from normal sunlight hitting it through a window. The UV radiation essentially breaks the covalent bonds, which is a process called photodegradation.
Photodegradation, right.
And that turns the piece a nasty amber yellow. It becomes brittle. But the high-end epoxy resins, the kind utilized by professionals building those massive ocean tables, are chemically formulated with specific, highly advanced additives to fight this.
Okay, this is where the science gets really cool.
They include specialized UV stabilizers and, crucially, an additive known as HALS.
Yes, I saw that acronym all over the high-end studio manifests. HALS. I had to actually look up what it meant because, honestly, it sounded like a rogue AI from a sci-fi movie.
It does sound like that, doesn't it?
It really does. Hindered amine light stabilizers. But I have to admit, I'm a little confused by the chemistry here. How exactly does a chemical just sit inside a solid block of plastic and fight off sunlight?
Well, it is a brilliant piece of chemical engineering. So when UV light hits a polymer, it excites the molecules and knocks electrons out of orbit.
Okay.
This creates what are called free radicals. These free radicals are highly reactive, unstable atoms that just tear through the polymer backbone trying to steal electrons.
Like microscopic vandals.
Exactly. And that causes chain scission, which manifests as that ugly yellowing we talked about. What HALS does is act as a molecular trap.
A trap.
Yeah, it's a radical scavenger. When a free radical is formed by sunlight, the hindered amine light stabilizer intercepts it. It essentially donates an electron to neutralize the threat before it can damage the plastic.
Wow, so it's like a microscopic bodyguard taking a bullet for the resin.
That's a perfect analogy. But here is the truly incredible part. After it neutralizes the free radical, the HALS molecule undergoes a further chemical reaction with ambient oxygen. Wait, oxygen from the air?
Yes. And that actually regenerates the stabilizer back to its original state.
No way, it reloads.
It reloads. It is a continuous, self-healing chemical loop operating silently within the solid plastic.
That is mind-blowing.
It really is. And this is why a piece of high-end resin art can sit in a sunlit architectural foyer for decades and remain as perfectly optically clear as the day it was poured. The artist is investing heavily in this high-grade, self-regenerating chemistry to ensure the permanence of the work.
Man, that is just... Wow, so you have this volatile heat-generating chemical reaction that requires absolute precision and advanced radical scavengers.
Right.
But reading through the source materials, the battle doesn't stop in the mixing cup at all. The actual environment you are working in acts as a ruthless dictator.
Oh, absolutely. The environment is everything.
I was reading through the studio setup notes in our sources, and frankly, it sounds less like an art studio and more like a level 4 biosafety lab.
It pretty much is. I mean, I understand keeping the dust out, obviously. A single piece of dog hair floating into the wet resin ruins the whole thing.
Oh, it's heartbreaking when that happens.
I bet. But why are they so obsessed with the room's ambient temperature? Isn't this stuff just liquid plastic?
Well, the ambient temperature dictates the viscosity of the fluid, and viscosity dictates everything.
Okay, how so?
If the studio is just a few degrees too cold, the kinetic energy of the molecules drops. The resin becomes incredibly stubborn. Instead of flowing smoothly like warm honey, it flows like cold, thick molasses.
Oh, yeah, I can picture that.
And when it becomes that thick, it turns milky. It loses its clarity. But far more critically, the surface tension becomes too strong to release the air bubbles that got trapped inside it during the mixing process.
So they're just stuck.
They are literally locked in place by the cold fluid dynamics. You are left with a cloudy, ruined, structurally compromised piece.
And on the flip side of that, I noticed a massive emphasis on humidity control. I mean, they run industrial dehumidifiers constantly.
Non-stop, yeah.
You'd think a little moisture in the air wouldn't really matter to a synthetic polymer, but the chemistry breakdowns say it is devastating.
Moisture is the absolute nemesis of an uncured epoxy polyamine system.
Really? Just normal humidity?
High ambient humidity, or even a sudden drop in temperature that causes invisible condensation in the room, triggers a localized premature chemical failure right on the surface of the piece.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The moisture in the air reacts with the hardener before the hardener can react with the resin, creating a carbamate salt on the surface. In the industry, this is known as amine blush.
Amine blush? It sounds almost poetic, like a makeup technique. But the studio notes describe it as a complete disaster.
It is the furthest thing from poetic when it happens to your work. It is a greasy, waxy, sometimes sticky film that forms an opaque crust right on top of the cured resin.
Gross.
Yeah, it completely obliterates that signature glass-like shine. You go to run your hand across your beautiful glossy tabletop and it feels like it's covered in industrial grease.
Can't you just clean it off?
No, because it is a chemical byproduct bonded to the surface, you can't just wipe it off with a towel or some cleaner.
Oh, man.
It requires aggressive physical sanding to break through the crust and a complete repouring of a top coat to fix. It costs the artist days of labor and hundreds of dollars in lost material.
Just because it was a little humid on a Tuesday.
Exactly.
And then there is the incredibly mundane yet vital act of leveling. We take gravity for granted, but I realized reading this that if you are pouring liquid into a mold for, say, a large geometric pyramid, and your massive workbench is tilted by even a fraction of a single degree.
Gravity is relentless.
It is.
Over the 12 to 24 hours it takes for the resin to slowly reach its gel state and harden, the fluid will slowly, imperceptibly pool to the lower side.
So the leveling process has to be perfect.
It requires the calibration of precision optical lenses. Artists use highly sensitive machinist levels across multiple axes of their tables.
Yeah.
Because if they don't, when they finally demold the piece, they will find that the apex of their perfect pyramid is lopsided, or a serving tray has a thick edge and a visibly thin edge. The entire geometric symmetry, which is the foundation of the visual illusion, is compromised.
And we haven't even touched on the human safety aspect yet.
Oh, that's paramount.
This isn't watercolor painting where you lick the brush to get a fine point. You are dealing with intense, volatile organic compounds during the curing process.
Very toxic fumes.
Yeah. The studio manifests show massive line items for nitrile gloves, full-face organic vapor respirators with specific chemical cartridges, and industrial ventilation systems.
What's really fascinating here is how these strict environmental and safety demands serve as a hard dividing line in the industry.
What do you mean?
Well, it cleanly separates the casual weekend hobbyist from the high-end interior decor professional.
Oh.
A professional isn't just relying on their home's thermostat. They are utilizing specialized industrial warming vats to heat the resin components before mixing to drop the viscosity.
Taking no chances.
None. They are building massive, custom, climate-controlled incubators to cure their pieces in a locked environment where the temperature and humidity cannot fluctuate even a single percentage point. They understand that controlling the physics of the room is just as important as the chemistry in the cup.
It's like trying to bake a highly temperamental souffle inside a moving car during a hurricane.
That's exactly what it's like.
You are managing the molecular chemistry, the thermodynamics, the humidity, the airborne particulates, and gravity itself. The art isn't just in the pour. The art is in playing an aggressive, deeply calculated game of environmental defense against nature. You have to fight the elements just to get a clear block of plastic.
And that fight leads us directly to the artist's greatest, most persistent enemy.
Which is?
Because the very act of mixing those two chemical components together, which, as we know, is the only way to initiate the polymerization, inevitably introduces the one thing that instantly shatters the illusion of frozen water.
Bubbles.
Trapped atmospheric gas.
Yes, because of all that meticulous chemistry, you have to mix the resin and hardener together. And the sources highlight this incredible paradox of mixing.
It's a huge paradox, yes.
You have to mix it thoroughly, right? Relentlessly scraping the sides and bottom of the cup for several minutes to ensure that every single polymer molecule finds the polyamine molecule to bond with.
Right, because if you don't achieve perfect homogenization, you get soft, sticky, uncured spots in the final piece.
Exactly. But the simple fluid dynamics of stirring a viscous liquid means you are aggressively folding atmospheric air into the mixture.
You are trapping air with every stir.
So you are forced to mix agonizingly slowly, but perfectly thoroughly.
It is a delicate, almost meditative mechanical dance. And even with the most careful, deliberate stirring technique, millions of microscopic air bubbles are introduced into the fluid matrix.
It's unavoidable.
Totally unavoidable. And if you want that perfect, invisible medium, that flawless void that allows the suspended flower to look like it's floating in nothingness, you have to eradicate every single one of those bubbles.
And the artists in our sources have developed a highly technical, tiered system of warfare against these bubbles, ranging from rapid surface treatments to aggressive manipulation of atmospheric pressure.
A full-scale war.
Let's start at the surface.
Yeah.
You mix your resin, you pour it out into your mold, and you see all these tiny bubbles rising to the top. The sources say the immediate tactical response is to hit the liquid with a butane torch.
Yes, a torch.
But wait, didn't we just spend 10 minutes talking about how heat is the enemy because it triggers a flash cure?
We did, which is why the torch technique must be executed with extreme speed and precision. The artist is not trying to heat the thermal mass of the resin pool.
Okay, so what are they doing?
The quick, sweeping pass of the 2,000-degree flame does two distinct things very rapidly. First, the intense flash of heat temporarily drops the surface tension of the resin to near zero. This allows the natural buoyancy of the bubbles to overcome the drag forces of the fluid. Second, the carbon dioxide expelled from the flame alters the localized atmospheric pressure just above the surface, physically drawing the bubbles out.
That's wild.
Yeah, they breach the weakened surface tension and pop instantly, leaving behind a perfectly smooth, glass-like surface.
Okay, but logically, that only works for the bubbles that possess enough buoyancy to have already made it to the top.
Correct.
What about a massive deep pour, say a 12-inch thick geometric sculpture? A butane torch isn't going to influence the fluid dynamics of a microbubble suspended 6 inches deep in thick syrup.
No, the torch is useless for that.
Yeah.
And this is where the high-end professional tactics, which really read like laboratory protocols, come into play.
The heavy machinery.
Exactly. For those deep, complex pieces, artists move entirely beyond torches and bring in heavy machinery, specifically vacuum chambers and pressure pots.
I found the mechanics of the vacuum chamber absolutely fascinating. This is where the art studio truly becomes a physics lab. Explain how a vacuum chamber physically strips the air out of the liquid.
So, a vacuum chamber works by directly applying Boyle's law.
Boyle's law.
The artist mixes the resin in a clear bucket and places that entire bucket inside a thick acrylic and steel chamber before they pour it into the mold.
Okay, so it's still just in the bucket.
Right. They seal the lid and turn on a heavy-duty vacuum pump. As the pump pulls the atmosphere out of the chamber, the external pressure on the liquid plummets.
It's creating a vacuum.
Exactly. According to Boyle's law, as the pressure around a gas decreases, the volume of that gas must proportionally increase.
Ah, I see where this is going.
So the microscopic air bubbles trapped inside the liquid resin rapidly expand. They get larger and larger, their buoyancy increases massively, and the resin essentially begins to look like a rolling, violent boil without any heat.
Wow, like it's boiling cold.
Boiling cold. The bubbles rush to the surface, stretching the polymer skin until it snaps. Once the vacuum is released and normal atmospheric pressure crashes back down, any remaining microscopic voids are crushed. You pull out a bucket of optically perfect, totally bubble-free liquid ready to pour.
The visual of that must be wild, cold liquid suddenly frothing up to 3 times its volume.
It is very dramatic to watch.
But what about a pressure pot? Because reading the engineering specs on those, a pressure pot does the exact opposite of a vacuum chamber, right? And I have a major question about this.
Precisely opposite, yes. A pressure pot is utilized after the resin is poured into the mold.
Okay, so the mold goes in.
The entire mold assembly is placed inside a heavy-duty reinforced steel tank. An industrial air compressor then forces ambient air into the sealed tank, raising the internal atmospheric pressure to around 50 or 60 psi.
And this is where I need to challenge the physics a bit.
Go for it.
The sources say the pressure pot dissolves the bubbles into the resin matrix. Wait, dissolve. The atmospheric gas doesn't just magically disappear from existence. If I have a piece of plastic with millions of crushed air bubbles hiding inside it, does that change the structural integrity of the piece? Are there microscopic weak points everywhere?
That is a highly perceptive question, and the answer lies in Henry's law.
Okay, Boyle's law, now Henry's law.
Henry's law states that the solubility of a gas in a liquid is directly proportional to the pressure of that gas above the liquid.
So pressure forces it to mix.
Yes, the air doesn't disappear, you are correct. The immense sustained pressure literally forces the gas molecules to compress so tightly that they dissolve into the interstitial spaces between the polymer chains themselves.
Oh, wow.
They become infinitesimally small, totally invisible to the naked human eye.
But what about the structure?
As for structural integrity, because the gas is forced into a molecular solution rather than existing as a physical void or pocket, it does not create the macrostructural weak points that a large visible bubble would.
That makes sense.
The polymer crosslinks around these dissolved molecules. The piece cures under that massive pressure, locking the gas in its dissolved state permanently. When you depressurize the tank and take it out, it is structurally sound and optically flawless.
That is an incredible manipulation of physics. But there's another elite technique mentioned in the materials that doesn't use heavy steel tanks or vacuum pumps. It relies entirely on manipulating the thermodynamics we discussed earlier.
Right, chilled pouring.
Yes. Walk me through the mechanics of chilled pouring.
Chilled pouring is a masterclass in extending the chemical timeline.
Buying time.
Exactly. If an artist is executing a massive deep pour project, like a 300-pound dining table, they physically cannot mix and pour it all at standard room temperature because that massive volume of reactive material will guarantee a catastrophic flash cure.
It would just instantly burst into flames.
Pretty much. So the artist deliberately keeps the working environment, the molds, and the actual chemical components incredibly cool, sometimes chilling the resin jugs in water baths.
Like putting them on ice.
By drastically lowering the starting temperature, you starve the chemical reaction of its initial kinetic energy.
You are intentionally stretching out the open time, the window before the liquid locks up.
Exactly. You buy yourself the most valuable resource time. The resin might take 3 times as long to reach its gel state.
And what did that do for the bubbles?
Because the cross-linking is slowed to an absolute crawl, you don't need a vacuum chamber. Every single tiny bubble introduced during mixing has 10, maybe 15 hours to slowly, naturally fight its way through the viscous fluid, float to the surface, and vanish into the atmosphere before the liquid finally locks into a solid.
Wow.
It requires immense patience and perfectly calibrated climate control, but it guarantees absolute clarity on a massive scale.
But let's assume the artist has executed perfectly. They've managed the thermodynamics, they've beaten the humidity, they've manipulated atmospheric pressure to eradicate the bubbles.
The dream scenario.
Right. The resin finally cures. They peel the silicone mold away. A lot of people might think, great, the piece is done. But reading these studio workflows, pulling it from the mold is really just the beginning of the most grueling phase.
Yeah.
You still have to face the finishing crucible.
Demolding is merely a transition point.
Not the end.
Not at all. To achieve what the industry calls the wet look, a finish so highly reflective and perfectly flat that it looks like liquid even when it's rock hard, requires an exhausting, highly technical, multi-stage mechanical abrasion process. Sanding, yes. The surface right out of the mold might look decent to a layman, but it is rarely optically perfect. It almost always requires wet sanding.
And we aren't just talking about casually rubbing a piece of sandpaper over it to smooth a rough edge. We are talking about fundamentally altering how light interacts with the surface.
Yes.
The process starts with a rough 400 grit paper, which completely destroys the surface.
It hurts to watch.
I can imagine. You take this clear window you just spent weeks protecting, and you intentionally scratch it until it turns into opaque frosted glass. I imagine the psychological trust required to do that to your own artwork is immense.
It takes a lot of nerve. You are engaging in controlled microdestruction. You are using the 400 grit to shear off any microscopic peaks or chemical imperfections, creating a perfectly flat, albeit deeply scratched, planar surface.
Okay, getting it dead flat.
From there, you are systematically replacing those deep scratches with progressively smaller, shallower scratches. You move from 400 to 800 to 1500 to 2000, all the way up to 3000 grit.
That is so much sanding.
And the artist must constantly use a flow of water to lubricate the surface, washing away the slurry of microscopic polymer dust to prevent it from clogging the abrasive paper and gouging the surface.
As you move up in grits, you are changing the refractive index. You are making the microscopic peaks and valleys on the surface smaller than the wavelength of visible light.
Precisely. Once you reach 3000 grit, the surface is flawlessly smooth to the touch, but still slightly hazy to the eye because light is still scattering off microscopic abrasions.
So how do you get the clear window back?
This brings the artist to the final critical stage. Applying a sub-micron liquid polishing compound with a high-speed rotary buffing wheel.
Like polishing a car.
Very much so. The friction heat generated by the buffing pad, combined with the microscopic abrasives, essentially melts and realigns the very top molecular layer of the polymer into a continuous, perfectly flat sheet. It allows light to pass through without any scattering.
It's the exact same aggressive, multi-stage correction process used to polish the clear coat on a six-figure luxury sports car.
Exactly the same.
But this raises an important philosophical question for me, one that I kept thinking about while reading these intense technical protocols.
I'm curious.
If the ultimate goal of all this, the vacuum chambers, the chilled pores, the hours of wet sanding, this sub-micron buffing, if the goal is to strip away every single bubble and achieve a finish that looks like it was manufactured by a sterile, multi-million-dollar factory machine, does the pursuit of absolute perfection risk erasing the handmade soul of the artwork? Does it become almost too perfect, lacking the human touch?
That is the central defining tension of resin artistry. This raises an important question about how we define craft.
Right.
In most traditional crafts, hand-thrown pottery, woodworking, hand-blown glass, we actively celebrate the tool marks. We love the slight asymmetries or the bubbles in the glass because they serve as a permanent signature that a human hand made it.
We want it to look made by a person.
Exactly. But the philosophy of resin is fundamentally different. The soul of resin art isn't found in the organic imperfections of the medium itself.
Because the medium is just plastic.
Right. In this craft, the medium is engineered to be an invisible stage. The soul is found exclusively in what the artist chooses to place inside that flawless void. The clinical, manufactured perfection of the resin is what honors and elevates the organic object suspended within it.
The void becomes a stage. That is a brilliant way to frame it. Once the artist has conquered the chemistry, waged war on the bubbles, and polished this pristine, invisible space into existence, they now have to manipulate that space to create impossible depth. How do they actually craft the illusion?
It all comes back to a deep understanding of the chemical timeline, specifically manipulating what we call the gel state.
Here's where it gets really interesting. I was reading about the gel state. This is that narrow, highly specific window of viscoelasticity, where the resin is no longer a free-flowing Newtonian fluid, but it hasn't yet cross-linked enough to lock into a rock-hard solid.
Right.
It has the consistency of thick, sticky gelatin.
That window is the artist's most powerful tool. Think about the physics of density. If you drop a heavy, semi-precious stone into freshly poured, highly liquid resin, gravity pulls it straight to the bottom of the mold.
It just sinks.
It sinks. If you place a delicate piece of metallic gold leaf on top, its buoyancy and surface tension keep it floating right on the surface.
It won't sink.
But if an artist meticulously monitors the exothermic curve, constantly checking the viscosity, and waits for the exact, fleeting moment the resin enters that firm gel state, they can push that heavy stone or that feather-like gold leaf exactly halfway down into the matrix.
And it just stays there.
The thickened, semi-cross-linked polymer chains will grab hold of it. It won't sink and it won't rise. It becomes permanently suspended in the dead center of the piece, defying gravity.
And that requires incredible, almost instinctual intuition. You can't just set a timer on your phone because, as we established, the ambient temperature and humidity of the room drastically alter how fast that chemical reaction reaches the gel state.
You have to know your material intimately.
The artist has to constantly babysit the fluid. And mastering the suspension is what unlocks the ability to do advanced layering. Because if you want to build a truly massive three-dimensional world, you can't usually do it in one single dangerous pour. You have to use stage pouring.
Stage pouring is the architectural foundation of complex pieces.
How does that work?
The artist pours a base layer, perhaps an inch thick. They monitor it until it reaches that firm gel state. Then they carefully place their decorative elements, say, an arrangement of dried botanical ferns.
Okay.
Then, while the first layer is still chemically active enough to bond, they pour the next layer of clear resin right over it. They are literally building physical depth, millimeter by millimeter.
Layer by layer.
This mitigates the exothermic heat to prevent flash curing, but more importantly, it allows for strategic vertical placement of objects throughout the entire depth of the block.
And some of the artists highlighted in our sources take this to a mind-bending, almost hallucinatory level with 3D layering.
Oh, the 3D.
Yes. They will pour a very thin layer of clear resin, let it cure flat, and then take ultra-fine acrylic paint and actually paint just a fraction of an image on top of that cured plastic.
Right, just a cross-section.
Then they pour another clear layer, paint the next sliver of the image, and repeat this process sometimes 10 or 15 times.
And the optical result of that painstaking process is a true holographic effect. Because the painting literally exists on multiple distinct physical planes, separated by a clear, refractive medium, the subject matter possesses actual physical volume.
It's crazy to look at.
If an artist paints a koi fish using this method, the fish doesn't just look like a flat picture stuck in glass. It looks like a volumetric creature swimming inside the block. As you move your head, you can look around the fins.
And then there is interstitial layering, which creates what I think is the most captivating optical trick in the entire medium.
Parallax.
Parallax is amazing.
It relies on the refractive index, right? It's like calibrating precision optical lenses, forcing the eye to misjudge distance. Parallax is a visual phenomenon where objects appear to move or shift their relative positions to one another, depending on the angle from which they are viewed.
Right.
By placing specific elements, perhaps a layer of crushed glass at the very bottom, a translucent photograph suspended in the middle, and delicate metallic flakes floating near the top surface, the artist engineers a forced perspective.
And you walk by it.
As the viewer walks past the piece in the gallery, the metallic flakes in the foreground appear to move at a different speed than the photograph in the background. It hacks the brain's depth perception, transforming a completely static, solid block of plastic into a dynamic, interactive visual experience.
But the clear, invisible stage is only half the story. What happens when you introduce color? Because these artists aren't just making clear windows, they're making wild, vibrant abstracts.
The color chemistry is a whole other beast.
They use techniques called dirty pours, where multiple highly contrasting colors are layered into a single mixing cup and poured out to create chaotic, swirling patterns. They create ocean cells, manipulating the chemistry to literally look like seafoam bubbling up and breaking on a beach. And they do this using highly specialized, non-water-based pigments.
Right. The chemistry of introducing color into a polymer matrix is just as volatile as the cure itself.
Because of the moisture.
Exactly. As we discussed, you cannot use water-based acrylic paints to dye the resin because introducing moisture triggers amine blush and ruins the cross-linking. Artists must rely on specialized chemical agents.
Like what?
They use mica powders, which are finely milled, natural stone minerals coated in titanium dioxide. These particles act as microscopic prisms, interfering with light to provide a deep, pearlescent, metallic shimmer.
Oh, that's what gives it that sparkle.
Yes. They also use high-concentration alcohol inks, which possess a different specific gravity than the resin, allowing them to dynamically interact and push through the fluid, creating delicate, expanding blooms of translucent color that look like underwater explosions.
And my absolute favorite, the phosphorescent or glow powders.
Those are incredibly popular.
You mix this rare earth strontium illuminate powder into the resin, and during the day, the piece looks like a sophisticated clear sculpture with maybe a subtle milky hue. But at night, the powder absorbs the ambient ultraviolet daylight, stores the energy, and emits this soft, ethereal, glowing light for hours.
And it's beautiful.
You fundamentally change the utility of the object. You turn a static piece of art into functional ambient lighting.
What's fascinating here is how this functional material integration is the hallmark of what the luxury industry calls the Liquid Elite style.
The Liquid Elite style.
This is the exact point where resin leaves the realm of small desktop sculptures and aggressively enters the multi-million-dollar world of high-end, bespoke furniture and architectural decor. The defining driving characteristic of this aesthetic is the extreme juxtaposition of materials.
Right. It's about contrasting the sleek, ultra-modern synthetic control of the plastic with the ancient, chaotic, organic nature of the earth.
Exactly. An artist will take a massive slab of raw, live-edge walnut wood that still possesses the chaotic, irregular shape of the tree's bark, complete with knots and green imperfections.
Raw nature.
Or they will use jagged, raw, semi-precious geodes or shattered shards of tempered glass. They then seamlessly encase or bond these chaotic, ancient materials with the incredibly sleek, synthetic, optically perfect surface of the epoxy.
It's stunning.
The ultimate goal of these advanced techniques is rarely to invent a completely alien shape. The goal is to mimic and freeze natural phenomena. They use liquid polymer, specific gravity manipulation, and precise pigmentation to engineer a surface that looks indistinguishable from a deep space nebula, a crashing, foaming ocean wave, or the intricate, crystalline structure of the Earth's crust.
It is brilliant. It makes me think of these top-tier resin artists as high-level stage magicians.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it.
Just as a master illusionist uses dramatic lighting, smoke, and psychological misdirection to make the audience see something impossible, the resin artist uses parallax, chemical suspension, viscoelastic manipulation, and the refractive index of light to force the viewer's perspective.
They really do.
They are actively tricking your brain into seeing moving water, or infinite cosmic space, perfectly contained inside a completely solid, heavy, static object.
That is an excellent, highly accurate analogy. But the illusion, the magic trick, doesn't end when the piece is finally polished and finished.
Where does it go from there?
In fact, the artist's ability to permanently freeze time, to create this flawless, mesmerizing depth and chemical permanence, naturally elevates this medium. It pulls it out of the category of a simple weekend craft and transforms it into a highly lucrative, heavily sought-after luxury commodity.
The business side.
Yes. The art takes on a profound emotional weight, and therefore an immense financial weight.
Let's follow that thread, because the market analysis in our sources is fascinating. We have to talk about the economics of forever.
Yeah.
You have artists who started out 5 years ago making little colored coasters in their kitchen, fighting dust and humidity, and now they are running highly scaled, six-figure bespoke businesses. How does that economic leap happen?
It happens because these artists learn to leverage a very specific, deeply ingrained psychological concept, the forever item.
The forever item.
When a consumer looks at a high-end piece of resin art, their brain does not perceive it as a disposable consumer good or a fragile, fleeting trend.
Because it's a giant block of solid plastic.
Exactly. Because the material is essentially solid, highly durable, UV-protected, impact-resistant plastic that possesses the optical beauty of glass, it is perceived as a permanent, indestructible heirloom. And in the luxury market, forever items command exceptionally high profit margins. Because you aren't just selling the material, you are selling the timeline.
And reading through the data, the most powerful, financially dominant application of this forever concept is memorial art.
Oh, massive sector.
This isn't just a niche, this is a massive, highly emotional sector of the industry. People aren't just buying pretty abstract colors to match their drapes, they are boxing up and shipping the artist incredibly precious, emotionally heavy, irreplaceable items to be permanently preserved.
Yes. The stakes in memorial art are incredibly high.
I can't even imagine the pressure.
A bride will overnight ship her intricate, expensive wedding bouquet the morning after the ceremony. A grieving family will send the delicate funeral flowers from a loved one's service. Or they will entrust the artist with deeply personal historical family heirlooms, a grandmother's antique brooch, a father's military dog tags, or a child's very first pair of walking shoes.
And the artist just casts them.
Well, the artist must meticulously chemically dry the organic flowers over weeks using silica gel so they don't rot inside the plastic, prep the delicate items, and carefully encase them in that flawless, clear, UV, stable liquid void we spent so much time discussing.
And here is a question for you about the profound psychology of value here, because the economics seem almost magical.
Let's hear it.
How does an artist take an object that has essentially zero financial value on the open market, like a dried, dead, decaying flower or a scrap of fabric from an old shirt, and by simply encasing it in maybe $50 worth of liquid plastic, suddenly transform it into a premium-priced luxury heirloom that clients eagerly pay hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars for? What is the actual product being sold?
The transformation of value happens because the artist has stopped selling materials entirely. They are no longer selling $50 worth of epoxy and a dead flower. They are selling permanence.
Permanence.
They are selling the guaranteed, indestructible preservation of a fleeting memory. The raw materials might be inexpensive, but the emotional value of that specific memory to that specific client is infinite.
It's priceless to them.
Exactly. The client is happily paying for the artist's years of technical mastery, their proven ability to combat the thermal flash cures, to eradicate the microscopic bubbles in a vacuum chamber, and to utilize HALS to prevent yellowing, to ensure that their specific, irreplaceable memory is safely frozen in time forever. That immense emotional weight and the high-wire technical risk the artist takes on entirely justifies the luxury price tag.
It's powerful. It's almost a form of emotional alchemy.
Very much so.
But the high margins aren't just isolated to the memorial art sector. The sources outline a massive lucrative shift toward functional art and high-level artisan consulting. We mentioned the Liquid Elite style earlier. Artists are making river tables.
Those are incredibly popular.
These massive 300-pound dining tables, constructed from two gorgeous slabs of live-edge wood with a flowing, transparent river of blue or clear resin running right down the middle, binding the wood together.
And as the artist transitions their studio to accommodate these massive, large-scale functional pieces, their entire business model fundamentally shifts.
How so?
They evolve from simply making products and hoping someone buys them off a shelf to selling a highly personalized collaborative service. They step into the role of consultants. A high-end interior designer or a luxury homeowner building a custom house will commission them to create custom-branded corporate office accessories or massive bespoke architectural wall installations that are chemically engineered to perfectly match a room's specific lighting and color palette.
You stop being just a maker tinkering in a garage and you become a design partner sitting in boardrooms.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this shift is critical for scaling the revenue of a business. But what is equally fascinating from a purely operational standpoint is the hidden economics inside the studio itself. The incredible efficiency and profitability of a top-tier resin business relies heavily on what the sources call the waste not philosophy.
Yes. I loved reading about this because it's so pragmatic. Because luxury UV stabilized resin is incredibly expensive by the gallon, and when you mix the A and B sides, the chemical clock is ticking. You can't put the genie back in the bottle.
No, you use it or lose it.
Exactly. If you mix up a huge 5-gallon bucket of epoxy for a massive river table and you fill the mold, you almost always have some viscous material left over in the bucket. It's called overpour.
And a smart, strategically minded business owner never, ever lets that highly valuable overpour flash cure in the mixing bucket and go into the dumpster.
They use it for small stuff.
They meticulously channel every single remaining drop of that activated chemistry into smaller, pre-prepared silicone molds that they keep ready on the sidelines. They use the excess to cast small keychains, jewelry pendants, geometric paperweights, or smooth, tactile worry stones.
Which have incredible, almost infinite profit margins.
Precisely. The upfront cost of that batch of resin was already completely covered by the client who commissioned the $5,000 river table. Therefore, the material cost for those small keychains or worry stones is mathematically zero.
Wow.
When the artist sands, polishes, and sells those smaller items for $40 or $50, it is pure, unadulterated profit, ensuring that absolutely no material and no chemical potential is wasted. It is a brilliant microeconomic model.
And when it comes to selling these highly profitable, smaller items, how do they maximize the hype and keep prices high? They don't just dump 100 keychains on an Etsy store and hope for the best. The market analysis shows they use the aggressive psychology of scarcity.
The limited edition drop is a highly effective modern retail strategy.
Like sneaker culture.
Very similar. An artist will announce on their platforms that they are releasing only 10 highly complex, ocean-inspired pyramids at precisely noon on the 1st of the month.
Creating a frenzy.
By artificially limiting the supply of the product, they tap directly into the consumer's deep-seated fear of missing out. It creates an intense sense of urgency, it elevates the perceived exclusivity and prestige of the brand, and it trains a dedicated following of collectors to eagerly anticipate and immediately purchase whatever the artist releases next, sight unseen.
They also completely monetize their own hard-won expertise. Once an artist hits a certain level of technical mastery, where their pieces are perfectly clear and bubble-free, thousands of people want to know exactly how they do it.
It's an information economy, too.
So they pivot. They sell digital DIY masterclasses, or they partner with chemical manufacturers to sell branded artist kits, featuring their own preferred blends of resins and mica pigments, effectively monetizing their knowledge base and reaching a massive global audience of aspiring creators without having to sand a single piece.
The entire economic strategy here is fundamentally about a shift in mindset. The most financially successful people in this space have actively transitioned from identifying merely as a crafter to identifying as a brand owner and a CEO. They don't just sell plastic, they build an exclusive, aspirational experience around their work.
But having a brilliant, flawless, high-margin luxury product sitting on a workbench in your studio is completely useless if no one ever sees it.
Very true.
And because resin art is fundamentally about a visual, almost magical transformation, taking volatile liquids and turning them into solid, glossy masterpieces marketing, it requires translating that highly tactile physical perfection into a captivating two-dimensional digital experience. This brings us to the final crucial piece of the puzzle: digital storytelling and mastering the cinematic market.
In the modern digital age, particularly for highly visual, technically complex mediums, the rigorous process of creation is often just as valuable, if not more engaging, than the final static product.
The making of is the actual content. The internet is completely obsessed with resin videos. It is inherently algorithmically viral. You have these high-definition top-down time lapses of the thick resin being mixed, the vibrant alcohol inks expanding and swirling together like galaxies. You have the mesmerizing high frame rate footage of the butane torch lightly kissing the surface, and thousands of tiny bubbles vanishing instantly in a wave of clarity. And of course, the grand finale of every video: the demolding.
The demolding sequence is a remarkably crucial piece of digital marketing psychology.
People love it.
The satisfying, visceral snap and peel of the flexible silicone mold pulling away to reveal the flawless, impossibly glossy, rock-hard block of resin underneath triggers a very specific, highly potent ASMR response in the viewer.
ASMR, yeah.
Autonomous sensory meridian response. It completely bypasses the rational financial decision-making part of the brain and speaks directly to a primal human desire for order, for sudden beauty, and for intense sensory satisfaction. It hooks the viewer neurologically.
It is incredibly satisfying to watch. It's almost hypnotic. But you can't just film it in a dimly lit, dirty garage with a shaky phone camera. If you are charging five-figure luxury prices for your river tables, you have to use a highly calculated cinematic approach. You have to treat your 30-second social media posts like they are big-budget trailers for a high-end luxury film.
That is exactly the visual standard required to command those prices. This means the studio must invest heavily in professional macro photography.
Getting right up close.
The artist needs specialized camera lenses that can penetrate the resin and capture the microscopic pearlescent shimmer of the mica powder suspended deep in the matrix, or capture the exact way the stark studio lighting refracts and bends through the sharp 90-degree edge of a clear geometric pyramid. The photography itself must communicate the heavy, premium, flawless nature of the physical object.
And here's an analogy for you that I was chewing on while reading about their social media strategies. I think resin marketing operates exactly like a reverse magic trick.
A reverse magic trick. I like that.
Right. Usually, if a stage magician reveals exactly how a trick is done, if they show you the trapdoor or the hidden mirror or the sleight of hand, it completely ruins the magic. The awe is gone and you feel cheated. But with resin art, explicitly showing the grueling, highly technical, dangerous how actually increases the awe. It increases the viewer's trust, and ultimately, it completely justifies the massive price tag.
That is a very astute, highly accurate observation of consumer behavior, showing that behind-the-scenes labor is a vital form of consumer education.
Right, because otherwise they don't get it.
When a potential buyer scrolls past a picture of a finished resin tray, their initial uninformed thought might be, why does this simple plastic tray cost $300? I can buy a plastic tray at a big box store for $5.
Yeah.
But when the artist uses their platform to show them the time lapse of the meticulous, mathematically precise mixing, the dangerous thermal dynamics, the use of industrial organic vapor respirators, the complex Boyle's Law vacuum chambers, the hours upon hours spent wet sanding through 6 different microgrits of sandpaper, and the agonizingly careful placement of delicate gold leaf with tweezers, the consumer's perception shifts entirely.
It has to.
The price physically moves from expensive to valuable in their minds. They suddenly realize they are paying for intense, specialized, highly technical labor and chemical mastery, not just a bucket of synthetic materials.
And the high-end storytelling doesn't suddenly stop when the client clicks buy. The physical delivery of the piece has to aggressively reinforce everything the cinematic digital marketing promised. The physical unboxing experience in the client's home has to scream elite.
The brand identity must remain cohesive and premium through the very final touchpoint. If a client pays thousands of dollars for a luxury, bespoke memorial piece containing their grandmother's jewelry, it absolutely cannot arrive in a dented cardboard box wrapped in old newspaper.
Oh, definitely not.
It requires elegant, custom-branded, foam-cut packaging. It should include a heavy stock, hand-signed certificate of authenticity, detailing the exact proprietary UV-stabilized resins and specific pigments used. It must include specialized care instructions, perhaps providing a small, branded microfiber polishing cloth. These physical elements assure the customer that they haven't just bought a hobbyist's DIY project. They have invested in a certified, permanent piece of fine art.
And because the internet is inherently global, these artists have to figure out how to speak to very different visual and cultural languages. The aesthetic that sells out in 5 minutes in one country might totally flop and sit on a shelf in another.
Understanding your target market's specific cultural preferences is vital for global scaling.
For sure.
For example, the market analysis in the source material notes that the Japanese consumer market shows a remarkably high appreciation for kawaii aesthetics and incredibly high detail microscopic miniature crafts.
Oh, interesting.
A resin artist targeting this specific niche would focus their chemistry on creating tiny, hyper-intricate, highly polished, vibrantly colored pieces. Conversely, the contemporary Western architectural market currently leans heavily toward industrial chic, modern minimalist, or the Japanese philosophy of wabi-sabi.
Wabi-sabi. The philosophy of finding deep aesthetic beauty in the imperfect, the impermanent, and the incomplete.
Yes, exactly.
That's exactly where you see those raw, jagged, violently splintered pieces of live edge wood meeting the perfectly smooth, highly controlled, clear synthetic flow of the resin. It's organic chaos seamlessly meeting synthetic chemical control.
Exactly. By identifying these deep culture preferences and surgically tailoring the brand's aesthetic, whether it's neon pop art colors or sleek, monochromatic wabi-sabi minimalism, the artist ensures their cinematic marketing is solving a very specific problem for the consumer.
Right.
Whether that problem is an interior designer needing a massive, brutal statement piece for an industrial loft, or a husband looking for a delicate, unique, highly personalized anniversary gift, the marketing perfectly positions the resin art as the ultimate premium solution.
So what does this all mean? We have journeyed through an incredible amount of information today.
We really have.
We started with buckets of toxic, highly volatile industrial liquid polyamines. We waded through the dangerous thermodynamics of exothermic flash fires. We applied Boyle's Law inside vacuum chambers to eradicate microscopic atmosphere. We utilized advanced radical scavengers to fight off the sun. And we explored the microabrasion physics of wet sanding. And we followed all of that through to the creation of luminous, rock-solid expressions of human emotion, memorial preservation, and bespoke six-figure luxury branding.
It's quite the journey. It means that true, enduring success in this highly specific medium demands a remarkably rare combination of interdisciplinary skills.
Absolutely.
It requires the meticulous, unforgiving precision of a polymer chemist to manage the thermodynamics of the cure. It requires the intuitive, emotional soul of a poet to arrange the delicate organic elements and capture the fleeting emotion of a memory. And it requires the ruthless, strategic mind of a modern CEO to cinematically market, price, and scale that brand to a global audience.
It really does. It is a monumental undertaking. So to you listening, the next time you're scrolling through your feed and you see that flawless, glowing resin river table, or you walk past a perfectly preserved, delicate wedding bouquet suspended forever in a heavy geometric block, you won't just see a pretty, shiny object.
You'll see the process.
Exactly. You will see the invisible, hard-fought, highly technical battles waged against temperature, against humidity, against atmospheric pressure, and against gravity itself. You will see the immense, grueling labor required to create that perfect, seamless illusion of frozen time.
The profound irony of this craft is that the more technically perfect the final piece is, the more invisible the intense labor becomes.
The perfection hides the struggle.
Right. But now you know the deep science, the thermodynamics, and the sweat suspended within that clear, silent void.
Which leaves us with one final kind of mind-bending thought to mull over as we wrap up.
Okay, let's hear it.
We spent all this time talking about how these high-end epoxies are chemically formulated with advanced UV stabilizers and HALS to last for decades without yellowing. We talked about how they are aggressively marketed as indestructible forever items, acting as permanent preservatives for our deepest emotional mementos.
Right.
But what happens centuries from now? Long after our current buildings fall and our civilization shifts, we are essentially creating permanent, crystal clear, synthetic fossils of our modern lives.
Oh, wow.
Imagine future archaeologists, thousands of years from now, digging through the geological strata of our cities and unearthing these perfectly preserved, glowing resin cubes. They will find perfectly intact dried wedding flowers, grandmother's antique brooches, and smooth little overpour worry stones completely untouched by time, rot, or decay. What will they think of us?
That's fascinating.
What will they think of the mundane, emotional things we chose to permanently freeze in time using advanced polymer chemistry?
It is a profound, almost unsettling legacy to leave behind for the future, locked permanently in perfect, unyielding chemical clarity.
It really is a wild thought to leave on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the mesmerizing, volatile, and deeply emotional world of the Liquid Elite. Keep observing the things around you, keep questioning how they are made, and keep exploring your curiosity. We'll catch you on the next one.